In this lesson, we're going to talk about the importance of thumbnailing and a little bit about beatboarding for getting our initial ideas down. Now, even though the emphasis of this course is going to be quite firmly in the realm of 2D, 3D hybrid, with the camera work and the staging being done in 3D, I have yet to find a more immediate and more instinctive process to throwing down ideas than thumbnailing. I still find them to be the most immediate and useful way of getting my head and my hand connected to the project and the story and on the page. Before we start getting too technical or too specific, it's just about those images that come to mind when you read the script. They can be used at any point in this process. We're going to talk about like immediately now thumbnailing from a script, but at any point as you move forward throughout this course, I want you to keep this fundamental in mind, that anytime you finding yourself a little stuck or like in the 3D aspect or anything like that, finding that, then just stop, scribble some ideas down as thumbnails, and then see if that helps you break through. I bet that it will in many cases. I want us to keep tethering these more advanced, complex approaches like the 2D, 3D hybrid stuff. Always keep tethering that back to these like just core fundamentals of natural drawing and ideation. So using our script breakdowns now, we've read through the script, we know the characters, we know all the main beats, we've already discussed all of that, so we're fully familiar with all that. So I want us to now do a set of thumbnails that covers very, very broadly. I don't want us to get into anything to do with, what order the shots come in, or I don't want you to feel like you have to thumbnail for every shot. I want you to be completely liberated here in you've read the script. What are the images that are coming to mind? What are the sections that are speaking to you? I want you to sketch those down as loosely as you can. I want you to just follow your visual instinct as a way of you getting into this scene and finding your version of this script, of this story, of this project. We want to just lean into our instincts here. We can skip whatever we don't have an awful lot of interest for, we don't have an image for. You can draw multiple images for a moment that you're really getting those images coming to you from. I know that if you've read these scripts now and as we've been talking through this, you've got images in mind already. You're visual people. I know that when I read scripts, I constantly get, a whole bunch of images. They don't happen for every single moment. The first time I read something, I think of these as kind of like the tentpole images as they come to mind now. Let's draw those down. We need to get a broad enough coverage that we've got something that resembles the full coverage of the script, but in a very, very broad sense. So this is where I'm talking about the concept of beatboarding, right? So we're thumbnailing here really for a beatboarding type of frequency of panels or number of panels. Beatboards, if you're not familiar with the term, are somewhere between a shot and what you would refer to as a key art within the concept art world. So when we create key art for like pitch documents and other projects, we're trying to convey a sense of a moment, but we're trying to also encapsulate quite a lot of information usually within that singular image. So in some cases, those things do work well as a shot choice, but in other cases, they kind of don't, right? Sometimes they can have a little bit too much information in them but to be like a cinematic shot choice. So just kind of think about like that scale, right? Between like it's a shot, but it doesn't have to be a shot. What you're trying to do is essentially convey a moment in a single image. And that might require you having a bunch of stuff happening in that one image that might not literally all happen at once. You might have character actions overlapping that wouldn't happen directly at that moment, or your framings are wide enough that you're taking in, the full context of the moment. I think that's a good way to approach beatboarding and the thumbnailing for the beatboarding. But also feel free to draw smaller, more intimate type things as well. Don't feel like every single one of these has to be, a big epic action shot or something like that. As you can see from the examples I'm showing, I've done quite a variety here. So my approach, and this is the approach I'd like you to take as well, is when you've gone through the script now, you're reading through the script, literally just go through it and draw up whatever comes to mind. I've done around 40 images here, and I felt like I could roughly cover what I felt like I wanted to cover in about 40 images. And they were just whatever was coming to mind. You can see me kind of go back and forth on my decisions as I'm drawing them as well. Some of them are kind of more intimate character moments, and some of them are more all-encompassing images that kind of stand on their own a bit better. So I just want you to follow your instincts and just play. Do not worry as well about what order they're in, right? Please do not worry for a second about, I've drawn this thumbnail, and now what's the next thumbnail? What's the next shot? Forget about that. It doesn't matter. We're not talking about structure here. We're just talking about our instinctive reaction to the content for our image creation purposes. What are the images that come to mind? They can be as loose as you want. If you kind of find yourself working quite non-linear, so your shots aren't in order in any kind of way, you're just like drawing things, or maybe you're drawing on post-it notes, or however you like to work for this kind of stuff, that's absolutely fine. And I think that that particular process of working non-linear is something I do quite a lot of. It doesn't work for everyone, but it certainly works for me. I find that not having to worry about the structure when I'm thinking about just pure imagery helps me just kind of, it's a liberating process of just, here's an image, I'm drawing it. Here's another image, I'm drawing it. It doesn't matter where it goes yet, right? These are just images. But on the other end of that spectrum, if you are much more linearly minded, then feel free to, as you're thumbnailing this, to do it in the order that you think they would occur in the story. These kind of more beatboard type images can also, if you think of them as sort of like tentpole moments as well in the story, where maybe there's a really big moment or there's a very significant moment that you can cover a lot of information in, those can act as these tentpole moments in your image making. So then you can find ways between them as you start fleshing it out. And as we go through into the 3D blocking and everything, we'll be using these thumbnails and these beatboards as a kind of basis for, let's try and do that in 3D now. Let's try and match that thumbnail you've done. What does that look like now? And then how do we explore out from there? Once we've done our thumbnails, we'll need to kind of evaluate them then, right? Because we'll have about, like, I've done 40 thumbnails for my kind of thumbnail pass. And what we're going to do then is select a much smaller number of those. I think 5 to 7 images, something like that, that we think can, when combined, just as a small unit of images, tell the broadest version of the story possible within a small number of images. Think of, again, coming back to that comparison with key art. You know, key art imagery tells a story, but it certainly doesn't tell a complete story, right? It just tells a very broad gesture of the kind of mood and the kind of things that are going to happen in that story. Okay, so let's take a look at these images then and see, let's evaluate them as both kind of a shot idea and as a more of a beatboard idea. And from that, then we can go, yes, that might work as a beatboard. I'm going to take that one and kind of bank it. And then the others I'm just going to leave as ideas for shots as we move forward, right? I'll definitely be coming back to a lot of these, even if I don't think they're relevant for this particular reduced beatboard pass. So this image, okay, that's telling us quite a lot, or it could potentially tell us quite a lot. It says, what does it say? What does the image say? It says, here is a boat full of goblins going on an adventure toward whatever is off in the background, right? So that's giving you a very clear direction of, here's the adventurers going toward the adventure, and you get lots of broad imagery and environmental detail there as well. So that's that's definitely a contender. So I'm gonna bank that now. I'll pop that down here into my little bank. Now, in terms of an emotional and important beat in the story, this is definitely one of them, right? So early on in the story, where Artemis is kind of looking at the grandma photo, and then Wodan comforts him, right? This isn't necessarily the optimum angle for that. This is like the first version that I've drawn of this, right? So when I come to develop it, I would find more optimal angles for it. But as a moment, it definitely needs to be there in the story. But as an image on its own for a beatboard, does it stand up? Is there enough information? Like, we don't know what he's looking at. We don't know why he's sad. It's kind of a bit confusing, perhaps, if it's not in more context. So I'm going to pass on that one. This one is kind of covering the same beat, but not as effectively. So I'll pass on that one. This was me jumping back and thinking, like, for a classic, like going through the Argonath type shot with those giant statues that we have in the background. Again, I don't think it stands on its own. Now, here's an example, right? Let's take this section here of where Yoma fires Artemis up into the air on his rocket launcher, right? Because it's a fun little beat, and when I was reading it, I was just getting a lot of little images pop in. So I kind of drew them all up, and as individual shots, as a basis for individual shots, I think each of these works fine. Right, this shot works fine. This shot. You would have something along these lines, as you know, if you were fully developing this out into shots. But as individual images, do any of them convey enough information to work? And I would say that the only one that potentially does is this one. But it's another vista. We've already kind of said this in the previous shot. So what I'll do is, for the minute, I'll bank that as well, right? And we can evaluate it next to the other one as well. So these shots absolutely don't hold up on their own, right? This one here, number 10, was supposed to be like a profile shot of the goggles like popping out from the head. Like that just doesn't work, right? On its own. You absolutely have to have the context of the other shots. So then what I moved on to was like his view through his super long lens zoomed in goggles, right? And this would be like over the brow of the trees into the altar. So you start to see that. Now that, again, that's giving you quite a lot of information, right? So you've got the altar, you've got the grandma, you've got the frog boys, you've got the trees, saying a lot about the environment. You've kind of connected it to Artemis with the you know, the vignette thing in around the corners. It's quite, I think those vignettes might be confusing. If I was probably going to move forward with this image, I probably would just lose the vignette and go for that image alone. This one was like more of a sort of dramatic tilted angle on the same sort of scenes, but from a ground level. Yeah, I probably wouldn't go for that. This one, number 13, was actually something that was inspired by something Antonio said when we were briefing on this. Was this like really long lens shot from behind Mavis as the troll is coming out of the thing. Now that's a pretty badass image. I'm gonna bank that for a minute, right? Because I think what we also want to think about with these images that we're selecting for our to develop as little beat boards is that idea again of key art, right? What are images that are going to be striking and kind of say, oh, this is what the story's about, right? Because an image like that could be really effective, right? Is here's the captive, here's the enemy, you know, it's dramatically framed, you know, it could work really well as a key moment. This bit as well, when Artemis is coming back down, these two here, 14 and 15, again, they just don't work on their own, right? Even this one entirely, right? This one here, 14, I had to draw two figures of Artemis coming in there to make that shot work. So this is definitely a shot that requires more panels than just a single image. And then this one out of context just simply doesn't work. There's no way out of context that image works. But in context, it absolutely could, right? So then we come to 16, which is quite an all-encompassing image. So this would be after he's flown back in and crashed into Yomar and Vedak. And I think you've got all four characters. We've got the localized environment of the ship, and we've got a nice little comedic reaction. There's potentially a lot to convey about the characters in this shot. So I'm going to bank that one because I think that's potentially worth developing. This shot then, again, it's giving you similar information to this shot, right? Just in a more intimate framing. As a shot, this absolutely feels like a shot that will have to exist in my particular pass. But I'm not sure I need it right now. Now, this image here. Now, if we were talking about shortcutting things, right? And talking about like conveying a sense of journey and going to a place, arriving in a new area, this image could work quite well. So I'm going to drag this one down as well as another option, and we can evaluate that a little more in a minute. Now these two images were actually from the same beat, which was when the guys get out of the ship. So, but it's just a different angle. I didn't like the angle on 19, so I redraw it in 20, so that it's like Artemis is just about getting out of the boat there. We've got the three of them forming up, and then way off in the distance is like the next stage of the adventure. That could work. That could work. So let's grab that. Hey, what are you doing on there? You're not supposed to be there yet. Then we have a shot like this, right? So something else to bear in mind as well with these shot choices is you want a variety across them as well. So you don't want them to all be wides, you don't want all to be close, you don't want them all to be group shots, but you do probably want a group shot, you do probably want a wide, you do probably want an intimate one. So I'm definitely going to bank this one because I think that could be a really good group shot because everyone's kind of out of the boat there. And within that is the potential then to convey each of their characters differently by how I draw the posture of the characters. So let's stick with that one. This one's not too bad in terms of like they would be journeying up. They're journeying through a forest. It gives a good sense of journey. But I think is that a contender? I think I'll skip that one. So again, it's the same reason as before, right? I think some of these, they work, but they need the context of other shots in order to work. Here we would have then they're coming up along over the edge of the clearing where they stop and they look over into the clearing. But again, that image alone, if you combined it with the next image, so combined it with these two images, that works really well, right? So as a shot choice, this would work well into that. But as a single image, does this one work? It's not really telling you anything, right? It's just telling you they're looking at something. That's not enough, right? That's not enough information. Whereas here, it's like, it's telling you what they're actually looking at and it's setting up all of the staging. So let's bank that one. That one can work on its own. This was me just messing about with the frog boys again. So we got a frog boy with Mavis's hat on here. Again, that image is just too isolated, I think, to work. This one could potentially work. But we've probably, I feel like in the two shots we've already got as contenders for the ritual area that you could do this anyway, right? You'll have the frog boys dancing around. Again, this one doesn't really work on its own. This is just like a reverse shot of that looking up to set up that the guys are up here, like in that little bush. But that's, again, that's something that you would be doing on a shot by shot basis rather than a single image. The guys get angry. Here, number 9, this is where they've seen what's going on. This one is then where Vedak runs forward in a rage. Now, there's quite a lot of information in that shot, right? Because you've got, here's the guys grouped in the background. Here's one of the characters, like in a much more specified action, running forward, different emotional state. You're actually telling a story there potentially. And you've got all this stuff potentially like he's run forward and all of the logs and debris and stuff. So that's quite a dynamic shot there. So I'm gonna bank that one. This one is a shot that I've had in my mind for ages and ages, whereas like as they run down the banking, you know, you could cut to this absolutely massive wide vista of them all running down. I think that we're too far away from the characters here for this to work on its own. So I'm gonna skip that one. This one is like the full-on battle image, right? This is the moment before the 3 main goblins here all clash with the frog boys. So this one, there's a lot of information going on there, right? So that's definitely a contender. I'll have to sort these out. This was then like Artemis being afraid with all of the like chaos kind of kicking around him. I'll probably skip that one. And then this was a close-up. Kind of doesn't work without that one. They work together well. This is a very important moment in the story. And again, we're kind of conveying something in the foreground. We've got a lot of information in the background. So that's a contender as well, I think. Then we're down to our last strip. So between these two images, now this is a toss-up, right? Because they're very similar in a way, right? This is essentially kind of a wider, more environment conveying version of this one, right? But I think this is a much more dramatic angle at 16. So I think what I'll do is I might take that one, and if I do develop it, I'll come out a little bit, so there's just a little bit more information on the characters in the foreground, but I won't go as wide as this. So I'm going to grab 16. Again, this is, I think, just too close to work. And then in terms of like a beat that conveys the final action moment, so this one is like the ogre attacking them, and then this one is them finishing off the ogre. I think either of those could work, but I think given that we've just shown, like if we went with our previous pick, of the ogre arriving. This is then saying all hell breaks loose. Everyone's got doing something here. This is what, again, another example of like perhaps I'm with the key art mentality. Like there's an awful lot going on in this image. You might not ever shoot this exactly like this. You might split this up into a number of shots, but this image conveys an awful lot going on. So I'm going to grab that as well. And then this one popped up in my, once I just about finished them, and I thought, I had this other idea of, because this wasn't originally in the script and I wrote it into the script once I thumbnailed this, is that they could have a little group photo at the end with them all gathered around the head of the ogre. So I'm going to grab that and pop that on there as well. So now from that 41 images, I've currently got 15 now. I've got down 15. And then from those now, I need to whittle that down further. So I need to kind of evaluate whether I'm like the images that I've selected here now, am I kind of doubling up on things? Which one of them now, when we look at them together, which ones of them are more appealing? Or which ones do I just want to do? You know, a lot of it is just that as well, right? It's just personal taste. Which ones do you want to do? Let's take a look at them. You can see it's this like distillation process really, right? From having 40 to then having 15, and then now I'm going to try and get it down to 5 or 7 or something like that. All right, I'm just going to like go on kind of a gut reaction as well. Now, so the reason this works as well is because you're constantly reframing and reevaluating these images in a new context. So now they were part of a much broader thing. Now I've kind of whittled them down to this. It all kind of, they'll start to pop differently next to one another. So I'm gonna go through this now. I'm gonna go definitely not that. I don't like it. Not that one. I'm getting kind of gut reactions on these now. I don't think I'm into that image that much. This one is a fantastic potential, but since it was Antonio's idea, I'm not gonna do it. I'll skip that one. I think out of these two images here, so we've got this one and this one, kind of potentially saying the same sort of thing. They're saying here is the boat on a journey going somewhere. I think I like this one more because compositionally I might get something more interesting going with the bank in the foreground there. So I'm gonna pick that one, and I'm gonna say no to that one now. I think I need something that says here's the group doing the thing. I think this is the better group shot that I've got. This is comedic, but I think in terms of telling that, like, this isn't the story, right? This image doesn't convey the story. This image is like, here's a fun beat in the story. It's not the actual sort of point of the story. I think this image here says, here's the goblins on a mission, right? And it also tells you that, you know, we have the leader, we have a cocky guy here, we have another one here, and we have a little guy lagging behind in the background. So there's a lot of information being imparted there. So I'm going to grab that one, pull that down here with this. I think this is still a contender because all of the things I was trying to do in those other shots over here, I can do in this one if I wanted to. So I'm going to pop that one down there as a contender. Then we're looking for something that says action. We're looking for something. I think the next one I would choose would either be this one or this one. Let me get that out of the way a minute. So I would say it's either going to be this one or this one. This one probably gives us more information, but then it's kind of similar to this, right? So if I was gonna choose this one, I don't need that one anymore. So I'm gonna get rid of that one, and I'm gonna keep this one. Then we have to get to the ogre. Now we have got this one, which is a very strong storytelling beat for Artemis. So that's kind of a potential one as well. I can put that down there. Then I think I can make this one work if I just tweak that a bit. I think that's a very dramatic shot potentially. This one then says action, 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 and the stakes, right? We're conveying all of the stakes that are at play there with that image, and then finish it off with the happy photo. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 images potentially that I could choose as my beat boards. And if you look at that now, if we follow that through, does that tell a story? So this is the evaluation process now. So you need to do this as well. It's like, ask yourself now, once you've distilled this, does this tell enough of a broad version of this story to work as 5 or 7 images? Here we have the boat with the goblins on it on a journey, arriving at a new land. Here we have the goblins formed up, would be able to convey their personality, and that Artemis is kind of set aside from the group a little. He's behind. Battle, context of the environment, characters, just this is going to be a dramatic action moment. Then we have Artemis is not getting involved in that action. Then we have the arrival of the ogre. Then we have the action with the ogre. Then we have our victory, our ending. So I think if I was going to choose 7 images, those might be them. So I can just rearrange these now into more of a... I think I'm going to remove that Artemis one, actually get whittle this down to 6 images here. And let's just take a look at those. Yeah, I think that gives enough of a range that we're looking at. And you can see how few images you can break something down to and still convey the sense of the thing. And the great thing about these then, as I mentioned before, like these will act as kind of like tentpole moments for you, really kind of iconic moments that you can work towards or you can build out from once we get into like the 3D staging and everything. So once we've decided on our images, I've picked these 6 and I'm gonna work them up now to a more presentation sort of level. They still don't have to be like super clean or super precise or anything, but they just need to be worked up to work as, single images that read clearly and have more information in them. Just build up basically from that basic thumbnail, pass to something more developed. Really, I think that's the best way to think about it. Just a more developed. Don't have to be. Please don't go doing full concept paintings or anything for this. They serve a similar purpose to those key art images, but we don't need to work them up that far. So I'm just playing around with like tweaking things as well as I'm doing this, like tweaking the scale of the ship relative to the environment. And then on this image, it was about like kind of pulling out the characters a bit more and sort of making sure the solidity of the characters was working and the composition of those characters, because they're all kind of potentially, they all have, they have different sizes, and compositionally I want to get a bit of a more triangle in here than I had in my thumbnail. So yeah, it's just that usual process, of taking a thumbnail and developing it and refining it into something stronger. With this one in particular, this one was all about trying to get each of those characters poses and drawings to feel like they're unique characters. So Wodan here is drawn, in a very solid stoic position, very similar to his, his concept art, his character sheet. And then we have Vedak, who I wanted to have a bit of a swagger to him, a bit of an arrogance, a bit of a confidence, with his giant sword slung over his shoulder as he kind of swaggers up behind Wodan. And for him to fill, more of the screen space. And then Yoma, I wanted to kind of get this sense of like him rolling his sleeves up, ready for a fight, but looking quite serious. And then way off in the background then is our little Artemis, who is lagging way behind, very cautiously and slowly getting out of the ship. His posture, indicating that he's hesitant, whereas all of the other characters are ready to go. And then some, minor, like just drop in some flats, throw in a bit of shade in here and there. You can take this to whatever, simple level of simplicity you want, or you can add tonal pieces and bits of light and highlights and things like that. But keep it just to grayscale. As you build up these images now, as they start to look relatively decent, then these can act as like a nice, you can bank these, and kind of keep referring back to them as you move forward in the project as like key moments that you might want to try and hit as we move forward in the actual staging and the 3D aspect of it. Then we come to the big, my version of the big fight. There's a lot of characters on screen here, so I've kept the drawings, my drawings on this one quite simple and quite flat. Not too much shading on this one, just getting a basic feel for the environment and the the characters as they run in to fight the frog boys. With stuff like this, when we come to actually boarding, we'll be keeping all of the artwork flat, so we'll do some, just fairly sealed line work, and then we'll be just using nice basic flats, so each of the characters just has a nice silhouette. That's enough usually with boarding for characters to just read against the background, to read the silhouette clearly. That's ideally enough. Sometimes it's a good idea to use different colors for each of the characters, and we'll talk about that again. Then we're into that low angle. So as I said, when I was evaluating it, I kind of felt like somewhere between this one and the other wider version was where we wanted to be, but this had the more dramatic angle. So in my refinement process here now, I've just pulled that framing out a bit so we can get a bit more in the foreground. We can get the characters closer to camera. We can really exaggerate that sense of scale here of the ogre. Mavis is currently in this part of the time lapse really too small there. I'm gonna probably make her bigger in a minute. But yeah, it's just using like the foreground framing and making sure each of our characters takes up a distinct position and action within the frame, and that the ogre absolutely dominates here. Like, and when I come to the shading here now, it's like all about the ogre being backlit, so he's fully in shade and completely dominating that center composition. Then we have our action shot with the ogre. All hell breaks loose moment, and everyone's involved in this again. I think this one's a prime example of what I was talking about with regard to the key art approach, where you probably wouldn't have a shot exactly like this that would have absolutely all of this happening at the same time. There's an awful lot of stuff going on here. Right? We've got Artemis like jumping out of the way in the foreground. We've got Wodan and beneath the ogre's legs. We've got Yoma firing frog boys at the head. We've got Vedak dodging out of the way because the ogre's just slammed his massive club down on a piece of environment that he was standing on. It's a lot. That's a lot to convey in an actual moving shot. But it works perfectly well in a static image, and it helps to sell the scale and the drama and the stakes that are at play here. So I think it works as an image, as a single image, to convey that. So that's why I've chosen this one. And again, it's just about, when we come to laying in those flats, it's just about getting, whenever we got the ogre, like just having that ogre dominate the space. And you don't need to go too far again with, with the shading or anything here. It's like flats, a bit of highlight. That's enough. Little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of separation, because there's an awful lot of characters going on here. So I put that in just to help out with that. I forgot about Mavis's hat needing to be on Artemis until right at the end. Always remember the hat, massively important hat. And then finally, as I said earlier, when I was doing the thumbnails, I came up with this idea. It wasn't initially in the script, and I kind of wrote it into the script after this because it felt like a perfect way of coming full circle on this idea of the family photograph. There's just this time, this family photograph happens to be quite grotesque, with a severed head of a ogre and the blood spilling out and everything, and skulls everywhere. So this is a tricky one. My sizes are way off on this. I've noticed that once I'd finished it, that yeah, my sizes compared to that ogre head are probably off. Like if you compare the size of Wodan versus the grandmother and the thing on the head there, that's probably wrong. But again, it's an idea, right? It's just the idea of what this shot could be like from the script. And we've got Yomar in the foreground. He's the one taking the photograph, so he's cheekily in the corner of the camera. And I was kind of having a little play there with in the background with the idea of like one of the frog boys is perhaps like come back to consciousness and is trying to sneak off in the background, so it's just, and nobody's noticed him. So just a little bit of a playful element to the composition there as well. And again, I'm just working up the characters to a more developed, still fairly loose, but still just nice and developed, so that everyone reads distinctly as who they are. And everyone has a slightly different reaction or a different bit of personality to the way they're posed or staged. So Grandma and Artemis are really happy together up there, because he's the one who, he's the one who saved her, in inverted commas. They all play their part, but he gets the credit, I think. And then we've got Vedak kind of sulking because he didn't get to lay the final blow. So he's just kind of sulking there around the side, leaning on it like a pouting teenager. And yeah, so that's it. So once you've done that and we've got a bunch of images, then we can use these as our kind of baseline to move forward with, and we can keep referring back to these. So we've already got like a bunch of strong images together now that would act in the same way that key art would in a concept art document.